Conspirinormal podcast proudly presents the Strange Realities Conference. Strange Realities. Come join us for one day of presentations on the paranormal with live music at night featuring Tim Banal,
The Rise and Fall of the Flat Earth Theory,
Joshua Cutchin,
Alien Hybrid Lore,
Joe Damari,
Pushing the Limits of Reality,
Guy Malone,
Roswell 1947, What Really Happened,
Timothy Renner,
Pennsylvania Wildman,
and added to the lineup, Mark Anthony Wyatt,
Cornish Legends and UFO Sightings,
Zach Hunt,
presentation of his book Unraptured,
followed by a live recording of the Conspirinormal podcast. More speakers and music acts to be announced. October 19, 2019, SIR Nashville.
Tickets and info at www.strangerealitiesconference.com. $40 at the door, $30 pre-sale.
This is Conspirinormal, where the nexus of conspiracy theory and the paranormal meet. And now, we join the show already in progress with your hosts, Adam and Seraphiel.
All right, guys, welcome back to Conspirinormal. We are here, and we've got a special treat for you guys tonight. We're delving into true crime again with our good friend Jenny Ashford from the 13 O'Clock podcast, and she has just finished her latest book, latest magnum opus on the Faceless Villain,
The Faceless
Villain,
Part 3.
Welcome back, Jenny, to Conspirinormal.
Well, hey, you guys. I'm really happy to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. You're
Always
one of
a
our
pleasure.
favorite guests.
Oh, thank you.
So in this book, you cover these unsolved murders from 1980 to 1999, basically.
Yeah.
And for people that may have not, they're maybe new to the show or new to your show, for those people, can you give kind of like what's your criteria for the cases that you include in these books?
I didn't really have like a hard and fast criteria, I guess. I tried to, but then I kind of found myself, going off on different directions. Basically I wanted to do a trilogy that was the entire 20th century. And initially it was going to be one book, but then I had to divide it up into three because it was just too many. And so I just did it kind of in these little sections. What I wanted to do was I wanted to focus on cases that were that had creepier, mysterious elements. So usually random murders, like people that were murdered by strangers. So I usually left out stuff that was it was a robbery or, it was a mob hit or an assassination, like a political assassination or something like that, because even though they might not have ever caught the person that actually did it, it's still the motive for it wasn't mysterious. So that was kind of the rough criteria that I used, of stuff that I wanted to put in there. I was now I want cases that are just bizarre, that you're why would somebody do this? Why did they pick these people at random? It's that kind of thing.
Sure.
So I mostly kept with that. There was a couple ones that were kind of, on the fence. But then I was I kind of have to include that one because it's so well known, or the victim was kind of a well-known person or something like that. And it would be weird if I left it out. But usually I stuck to that criteria, just stuff that I thought was mysterious and that I couldn't really see any reason behind it. There didn't seem to be any reason behind it. So that's kind of what I try to do.
Okay. And you also talk a lot about the John Does or the Jane Does, a lot of Jane Does. That these bodies that just show up and then are either identified or in many cases are still unidentified.
Yeah, as an alarming amount are. And the funny thing about it too is that there are particular cases of serial killers where they're not even sure that it's one killer or these are all related crimes, like the Redhead murders, for example, where more than half of those victims are still unidentified because a lot of them were runaways or were prostitutes or something like that. And they think that maybe the serial killer, if it's just one guy, they're not entirely sure, might have been a truck driver or something like that. So he's just picking these girls up and killing them and just leaving them on the sides of highways somewhere. And, their families may not live in the same state or may not have reported them missing because, for various reasons, because they're estranged or whatever. So it's really alarming. And the thing about it, too, is that I had to leave out, like, as far as John and Jane Doe, cases go, I had to leave a lot out. Because for a while, like, I put some in the book, but then after a while, like, I kept looking, I'm like, I just can't put all of these in here. Like, especially if there wasn't a lot of detail about the case. So a lot of those I just had to leave out because there are so many. There's just like thousands and thousands and thousands. And it was really scary to me that there were so many people, that got murdered and that are just still unidentified to this day. I mean, they are working on it. And I did write about a few cases, where they were a Jane Doe, like say back in the early 80s, but say like in 2018, 2019, they have still been working on the case through DNA or fingerprinting or whatever. And some of them have been identified, but there's still like a whole bunch of them that haven't been. And that's really upsetting to me.
Yeah, it is. I mean, this is all throughout all three of these books too. And most of them are women. I mean, we've talked about this before, just like the disproportionate amount of violence towards women. I don't think, like, being male, like, I really have realized just how much these kind of violent acts have been done towards women. And it was your books that kind of like clued me into that, just how most of these victims are women, essentially.
Yeah. It does seem to be that, and like I said, and I think we talked about this when I was talking about the last volume.
Yeah.
It's like I didn't even really mean to do that. Like, I didn't mean to leave out, quote unquote, cases where the victims were male, because there are a lot in there.
Right.
But it does seem like, cases where the victims were male, there was usually some reason, like they were fighting with a rival, or it was a robbery, or it was a gang type of thing or something like that. Whereas when you get these kind of like random unsolved murders where it's just like some woman was just like walking home from work or just got off the bus or something like that, the victims of those types of crimes are overwhelmingly women. Yeah. So like I said, I didn't really mean to like make any statement or anything like that about like violence against women. It just so happens that those types of random murders, the victims are almost always women.
No, I mean, just like your facts and your research just bore it out. This exhaustive study that you've done on all this. Well, since we hit it already, let's talk about the Redhead murders, because this actually is pretty close to home for us. I think one of the bodies was actually found not too far from where we are in Nashville.
Yeah, there were some in Tennessee, and there were some kind of like, all over the place. And like I said, this is kind of a case where this could be a single serial killer. It could be multiple serial killers. They're not entirely sure. And there are a lot of cases that are like adjacent to it that they're not even sure are connected. I'm guessing that the reason they link a lot of these, like I said, because, most of the victims were runaways or were prostitutes or something like that, and were found alongside major highways where truck drivers would be. And just the fact that so many of them had red hair, auburn hair, something like that, which, red hair is kind of like, is not very common. So I'm guessing that's probably why they're linking a lot of these. But the Redhead murders, the series, they think like the kind of canonical ones took place between 1978 and the 1980s, although there were some up until the early 90s that they think might be related. So if this is one person or, a couple people working in synchrony or whatever, I mean, the low estimate is 6 victims, high estimate is 11 victims. A lot of these have not been identified, although some have been identified kind of recently. If this is one killer, he's also sometimes known as the Bible Belt Strangler. Mm-hmm. There was like a sociology class that gave him that name.
Yeah, I think it was University of Tennessee that did that, I think.
Yeah, in Elizabethton or something like that. But yeah, so the first one was actually found like I said, there were a few beforehand that they're not sure were linked, but one of the canonical ones was found in February of 1983, and that was in West Virginia. And this is Wetzel County Jane Doe. And she was actually found like alongside the side of Route 250 near Littleton, as I said, in West Virginia. And she was found by a pair of senior citizens who thought the body was a mannequin.
Yeah, that's a common thing in your books.
That's very common, because that's the first thing you would think. I mean, you wouldn't think, hey, that's a dead... Well, I would probably think, hey, it's a dead body, but I think most people would probably think it was a dead body. So now when the old couple found this girl, they assumed that she had just been dumped there because there was the ground was snowy, but the body didn't have any snow on it, and there weren't any other stuff on there. So they figured she had just been dumped. They found some tire tracks and footprints and stuff like right around there. Now, she hadn't been raped, and they couldn't determine like how she had died. Like I said, they call this guy the Bible Belt Strangler, and some of the other victims were strangled, but this one they couldn't really be determined. Because she had red hair, she would later get linked in between the others. Now, she was a little bit older. She was probably about 40, maybe, because some of the other victims were a lot younger, about 135 pounds, about 5'6". They think maybe she had at least one kid before, because she had like a cesarean scar. Now, they didn't think that she was necessarily like homeless or like a hitchhiker or anything like that, just because she had she had shaved her legs and her armpits and stuff like that, which they said usually if you're like a transient or something, that's not really something you'd worry about. So presumably she wasn't just homeless or whatever. They think that this girl, even though they don't know who she is, that she was seen either working at a bar in Wheeling, West Virginia, like not too long before she was found dead, or that she was a customer of that bar. So, as I said, now that woman is still unidentified. Now, they found another body in September of 1984, and this was in West Memphis, Arkansas, and she was found along Interstate 40, and she was 28 years old. They did identify her. Her name was Lisa Nichols. So she was found mostly naked. She just had a sweater on. She was actually from West Virginia. She had probably been estranged from her family, which was why, I don't know if she had been reported, because there's a problem too. It's like if the victims are transported like over a state line, then sometimes, even though technically law enforcement is supposed to like enter these bodies into a database, like a national database for missing persons stuff, but that wasn't always done, particularly back in the 80s. So sometimes it took like a long time to kind of coordinate. She was actually, when they found her, they didn't identify her for, I believe, almost a year. And then later on, they got her fingerprints and they were able to identify who she was. Although her parents did not identify her, this couple that she had been living with in Florida ended up having to identify her. So they think that maybe she had been hitchhiking and that she had been picked up from a truck stop and then someone had killed her. There was another one in early January 1985. This one was in Tennessee, in Jellicoe.
Okay. I know where that is. Yeah.
Yeah.
East Tennessee.
They found her off of Interstate 75. She had they think she'd been dead for 72 hours, but she must have been laying out in the weather because she was really decomposed. She was probably 17 to 25 years old, but could have been as old as 30 years old. She actually, I don't think she had been raped either. She was found fully dressed. She was also 12 weeks pregnant. So she was another one, also had red hair. Now, she was unidentified until 2018, actually. So for a long time, I think she was just known as Campbell County Jane Doe. But in 2018, late 2018, they actually identified her through fingerprints as Tina Farmer. She was originally from Indiana, and she was 21 years old. She had last been seen in Indianapolis with a truck driver who was supposedly going to Kentucky. Whether this guy was the one that killed her or she got a ride later on from someone else who ended up killing her, they don't really know. This was a case where she had gone missing in 1984, and her family did report her missing, but because she had been reported missing in Indiana, where she was from, and she was found in Tennessee, her name had not been entered into a national database, so they didn't put those two things together. Now another one happened. Another body was found in Tennessee in April of 1985, and this was actually just a skeleton. And this was like a young girl. She was probably between 9 and 15 years old. And she was also found near Jellicoe, about 200 yards off Big Wheel Gap Road. And this one, they're not sure how she died, but they're presuming, because she was found off the side of a road, they're presuming that was murder. But they didn't find the whole body. They only found like 32 bones, which included her skull. They did try to do like a facial reconstruction. But, they found some other like jewelry and shoes and things like that around the body. But they still haven't identified her. Now they have done the isotopic analysis, like on the bones and stuff, where they can tell like where you're from and where you've lived and stuff because of, various chemicals in the water and whatnot.
Yeah, I thought that was real interesting when you mentioned that stuff in the book.
Yeah, it's like they've made like a lot of strides in that. It's like amazing now how they could even tell you, it's like, oh, they were born here, but then when they were 10 years old, they moved to this place and stuff like that. They can tell, I guess, just like I said, by various, pollens in the air, various things like that. But yeah, so they think that this girl, whoever she is, that she was originally from Texas or possibly Florida. But that later she had moved to maybe the Pacific Coast, maybe the Southwest, maybe the Midwest. They're not entirely sure. But again, she is still unidentified. And then there was another one in Tennessee from March of 1985. This was also a skeleton. This was in Pleasant View. When they found her, they thought she had been dead about 4 months. Not entirely sure if she's related to the same series, but she did have red hair, and her body was found along an Interstate 24 in this case.
Yeah, that's not far from where we are right now.
Yeah. So this was like, most of them were found in Tennessee. There were some in Arkansas, there were some in Kentucky and stuff like that. So that's why they're thinking that this guy is most likely a truck driver. I mean, it might be more than one, and it might just be, coincidence that they all have red hair, but I don't know. I kind of feel like, because the age range is kind of wide, which is unusual for serial killers, but it wouldn't be the first time.
Right.
So, there's no telling. Yeah. So, this woman, as I said, is also unidentified, and she is thought to be between 31 and 40 years old. Now, this one, April 1985, they actually found a body inside a refrigerator. This was in Gray, Kentucky, alongside Route 25, and she had been suffocated. She had actually been dead for a couple days when they found her in the refrigerator. She was found naked, except for like a couple of necklaces that had kind of distinctive pendants on them. The creepy thing is that the refrigerator that they found her in had a sticker on the front that said Superwoman on it, which I thought was just like abandoned refrigerator. And for a long time, when they didn't, because she hadn't been identified, they called her the Redhead in the refrigerator, which I thought was a little insensitive, but I guess that's going to happen. But yeah, so she was actually seen. They thought she might have been trying to like hitch a ride with a trucker, like over CB. She was trying to get to North Carolina. She was again unidentified for a very long time, but then finally identified through DNA in 2018. as SB Regina Black Pilgrim. She was originally from North Carolina. Now, she had a kid. That's how they found her, like through the grown daughter's DNA, profile. The daughter had been only 6 weeks old when her mom disappeared.
Was this through like a 23andMe kit?
Yeah, it might have been. It's like that really does seem to be the way that they're doing a lot of this stuff.
Right.
Unless police like maybe already suspected that it might be her, and they were just kind of going down the possibilities, because they do try to rule out, because a lot of times when you go to like these unidentified, the unidentified wiki and all that other kind of stuff, like with all these people, like it'll have a big list at the bottom of other missing persons that have been ruled out as being this person. So I do feel like they do kind of just go down the list and then go, well, maybe it's this person. And then they call, a relative of that person and go, hey, we need your DNA to see if this is that and the other. So it might have been that as well. It might not have been like a Golden State Killer situation where it was just like kind of an accidental. One of his relatives just happened to upload their DNA to like a public, DNA database and stuff like that. Have you seen I saw him the other day because I hadn't really been following the case, the Golden State Killer case, but I saw him on the news the other day, and is he on a hunger strike or something like that?
Oh, no, I haven't heard about this. No.
He is unrecognizable. I didn't recognize him because he's so thin. It's like, it was like really weird because I'm sitting there going, they're talking about the Golden State Killer. I'm like, who the hell is that guy? And I was like, oh man, okay, I guess he just lost a whole bunch of weight.
Yeah, he's so terrible, and everyone's just taking his commissary.
Yeah, I guess.
That's probably what it is. Are there any suspects for the Redhead killer?
Like, not so much. It just really seems like there's a couple. The only suspects that they know about, there was a guy who was caught in the mid-1980s, and he was a trucker. He was 37 years old at the time. Now, he had actually got a redheaded woman in his truck, and he tried to strangle her and then left her on the side of the road thinking she was dead.
Uh-huh.
I believe he raped her also, but she survived, and she went and reported it. But apparently that kind of went nowhere. There was also another truck driver from Pennsylvania, and he had kidnapped and raped a woman in Indiana, but she got away from him. But apparently the Tennessee police interviewed both of these guys and didn't go any further with it because either there wasn't any evidence to link them to any of the other cases in question or for whatever other reason. But those are the only two suspects that I know about. And like I was saying, that sociology class that dubbed this guy the Bible Belt Strangler, they spent like a whole semester like doing an FBI profile of what this dude was probably like. And then they submitted it to the FBI and they said, yeah, I suppose so. They're like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. So that's pretty much the profile that they're going with. Being a white male born between 1936 and 1962, probably a commercial trucker whose main routes take him along Interstate 40 and all of its arteries. They said he's probably like tall to average height, 5'9" to 6'2", probably kind of heavy set, and that he probably lives around Knoxville, Tennessee. But that's their profile of the person.
The Bible Belt Strangler.
The Bible Belt Strangler, yeah.
Before we get into another case, I was wondering with this book, what really makes these cases different from the 60s and 70s? What are some of the trends that you saw? Is there like changes to investigative trends too that made it easier to find people, or what's really the main differences between the past decade?
One of the things I noticed in this book, Jenny, to add to that is there was a lot less of the cases that you mentioned in this book than the one in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, the middle version, the middle installment of the series was almost twice as long as the other two. Because, I mean, the first volume of this book was 50 years. It was like 1900 to 1959, right? Yeah. Yeah. And so, obviously I couldn't put as many cases in that just because it was so long ago and it's hard to find, research materials and things like that. But I noticed that when I was working on this book, it's like, it's long. It was about as long as the first one, but the second volume that covered the 60s and 70s was way longer. It seems like, and I think that, Tom and I have talked about this on our show a few times too. I really feel like the whole serial killer thing, that seemed to be like a huge aspect of the 60s and 70s. And yes, a lot of them were caught, but there were a lot of them that weren't caught too. And so there was a lot more of these type of like really horrible, like sexual crimes, this one guy like going around doing all this stuff. And it's like, there was some of that in the 80s and 90s, but it didn't seem quite as common. You know what I mean? You didn't really see, and even the ones that were there, like the Redhead murders or, even something more recent, like the Colonial Parkway killer and stuff, it mostly just seems like that kind of thing. It doesn't seem like killers with a specific signature as much as in the 60s and 70s. It's mostly just seemed like truckers. They're picking up hitchhikers or picking up prostitutes and just raping and strangling them and throwing them out on the side of the road. There wasn't very much of this, this thing that you saw with like Bundy or with Ed Kemper or something like that, where they had a very specific fetish, where it was like beheadings and necrophilia and things like that. And you didn't really see as much of that. And I'm not entirely sure why that is. It seems like a lot of the murder, you just don't see serial killers like you saw then. I think it's just because there was so much social upheaval and, everything was just shifting and, the whole zeitgeist was turned upside down. So I think there was a lot of that going on. It's just everything just went crazy for a while. It just seems like now, yes, we get mass shooters. Yes, we still have serial killers. Yes, we have that. But because of, the internet, because it's harder to get away with things nowadays, Well,
and all those high profile serial killers getting caught, and that being really publicized might have.
Yeah, it really does seem to have dampened down on that a lot.
And the FBI really being able to like zero in to the type and all the profiling.
Yeah, they got their profiling together and.
Yeah, and now and I really got interested, and I probably mentioned this before, but I really got interested in like this kind of geographical profiling where, if they know where all the victims are, they know like pretty much within a mile or so, like where this dude probably lives. You know what I mean? Because they're so used to like studying these types of killers that, they can narrow down, where he's probably coming from because they all have patterns, whether they realize it or not. So I do feel like since so much work has been done in that area, that it's much, much harder to get away with it. It's like you might see one crime like that, two crimes like that, but after a while, like they get caught. You know what I mean? There's DNA, we have so much stuff now that we didn't have back then, and even that started to come around like in the mid to late 1980s when DNA was kind of first coming into its infancy and stuff like that. So I think you see less of, there were some horrible cases in here about like, entire families being massacred and stuff like that, but you don't see as much of the serial killer type thing as you used to see. Not that specific type of thing.
Right. Is there a sense of how these killers like meet their victims versus and how much is maybe just straight up abduction? Is this kind of like is there a sense of how much of this kind of occurs through a normal kind of friendly interaction and then turns into that, or how much is just flat out abduction?
A lot of it's weird because a lot of the cases that I write about, like I said, they're usually kind of random. And so in that sense, I think that if the victim actually did know the killer, it was just like an acquaintance that no one even thought of. Right. Because a lot of times, like, a woman is, for example, like she gets off a bus from work or whatever, and she's abducted and murdered. Obviously the first thing you think of is like, oh, it's a boyfriend or it's some guy that was stalking her or something like that. But usually when they look into that, it wasn't them. So I do feel like there's a definite, it's either these dudes that are just like, oh, well, I'm just going to kill the first woman that walks by here, just whoever it is, or it's somebody that's been watching her from afar without her realizing it. You know what I mean? there's some cases like, the case of Dorothy Scott, which, is kind of a well-known case where, she had, taken a coworker to the hospital for a spider bite or something like that. And then she went out to get the car to like bring the car around so her and her friend could get back in the car. And then, the car goes speeding out of the parking lot, driven by a man. And then later on, they find her body. And they're pretty sure that the guy that did that was stalking her, but they don't know who it is. She had been getting like threatening phone calls and stuff like that, but she didn't really know the guy. You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of that going on, but I definitely do think a lot of it is just random. I think it's just a guy who's a killer and he's just like hanging out in a place and he's just like, okay, well, I'm going to kill somebody today. And whoever walks by, they're the lucky recipient, I guess. It's like, it just really seems like that might be what's going on because, like I said, if it was someone they knew, then it's likely that they would have solved it. The reason a lot of these are not solved is because there was no association between the killer and the victim.
Or he just sees a type that he likes and he just zeroes in on it.
Yeah, and that's probably the case in the Redhead murders.
I could see also how maybe kind of the nature of this is, besides some of these high profile, really organized, like the, really crazy ones, besides them, I could see how it's kind of an impersonal thing to be able to kill that many people. Whenever there's other murders and crimes of passion, things like that, people who only kill one person, it's usually like it usually is personal.
Right.
But, being able to kill multiple people, it probably has to be impersonal unless you're just on that extra level monster.
Well, there's always a sexual element that's involved too, where like basically they're using the dead body as a sex doll, essentially. I mean, that's really what it is.
Yeah, I mean, to do that type of stuff, you really have to like objectify the victims.
Right.
And I think, like I said, that's kind of the difference too. And I don't remember if I mentioned it on here, if I mentioned it on one of our shows, but that's kind of the big difference between, your male serial killers and your female serial killers. Obviously 85%, 90% of serial killers are men, but there is almost always like a sexual element, an objectification element, whereas female serial killers largely tend to kill people they know for other types of reasons, not usually for sexual reasons. It's usually for practical reasons, for money, for other reasons. Like they're more pragmatic.
A lot of the poisoners really, that's what they did.
It's like, they'll be like a nurse or, or something. They'll kill, babies in their care, or they'll poison the elderly people in their care. It's just people they know or that they interact with.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's seems kind of scary too in a different way.
Well, like Elaine Warnos, I mean, she was slightly different, I think, but with her, it was more, I guess, that she was kind of acting out on what she felt was like abuse towards her and to other women. I think was how what she did. I mean, she was a little slightly different. I mean, she's probably the best known female serial killer.
Yeah, she's like an exception to the rule, and even her. Yeah. She was kind of like, I don't think it was sexual for her.
No,
it was
wasn't.
just like she was treated badly by men and she thought that all men should suffer for that and that she should punish them.
There was this crusading aspect that she had.
Yeah, it was almost like a mission type killer because she thought, oh, well, these guys are scumbags and I'm getting rid of them. You know what I mean? So some male serial killers have that too, mission style serial killing, but where they think, oh, prostitutes and they're all whores and
Gary Ridgway, Green River, but he still liked to go back and have sex with the bodies. He's the only female killer that did. Yeah, as Tom would say, because it's free. Because it's free. Yeah,
that's what Tom says. Yeah,
it's pretty.
I'm like that is messed up.
Pretty amazing. Let's get into one of the crazier cases, and this is actually pretty early in the book. This is the Kingfish boat ramp murders.
Oh, and this case fascinated me so much because this happened in Florida, and I had never heard about it before. Yeah, I had never heard about it before. So it's this is another one where it's like I just have no idea like what the motive behind this could be. This is like a textbook kind of case that I wanted to put in the book because this is just messed up. So this happened in summer of 1980, and there was the Dumois family, And the dad, Juan Duan, he was a pediatrician, so he was a doctor. He had a wife named Maria. They had 4 kids. They were from Tampa. Now, in the summer of 1980, they're going to go take a vacation to this island called Anna Maria Island. It's like off the west coast of Florida. It's about 7 miles long. They're all going to go out with the, they got a boat and they're going to go fishing and all this other stuff. So they go there. They have like a vacation cottage. Now, the dad and his brother-in-law, whose name was Raymond Barrows, those two and the 2 younger kids who were named Eric and Mark, they were 13 and 9, they were going to go out on the boat and go fishing and everything like that. And the mom and the 2 older kids who were older teenagers, they stayed back at the vacation cottage doing whatever they were doing. So, so they go out on the boat, they go fishing, they come back like, kind of late afternoon. It was 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They had caught a bunch of fish. They were all happy about it and everything like that. So they come back, they hook the boat back to the, onto the car, and they're going to drive back to the vacation cottage. Now, while they're driving, this dude comes out of, there's like a little, little thing of trees or shrubbery or something. And he comes out of there and he's pushing a bicycle and he starts waving the car down. Now, Dr. Dumois, he like pulls over and he's like, hey man, what's the problem? Now, the guy says that he had hurt his ankle and that he would like a ride to, there was like a, like a condominium complex or like an apartment complex, like just up around the corner. He's like, can you just give me a ride to that? Because, I hurt my ankle and it hurts to walk. I can't ride my bike or whatever. So the guy's like, sure, man, it's just right over there. The doctor even like takes the dude's bike and like loads the dude's bike like in the boat. And then the guy gets in the car. Now they start driving away like towards this condominium complex. And all of a sudden the guy pulls out a gun and just starts shooting like inside the car. He shoots Raymond Barrows first. Then he shoots the 2 little boys in the head. And then he shoots the doctor. And then he like leans up into the front seat and steers the car off onto the shoulder of the road, gets out of the car and this is the middle of the afternoon. And he just gets his bike very calmly out of the boat and starts riding his bike down toward like a grocery store down the street. So 4 dead people in this car. He just like pulled it out and shot him. They did not know him. They had never seen him before. And all this other stuff. So he just shot these people. Now it happened that there was a guy named Robert Matsky. He was an Air Force lieutenant, retired, and he lived around there. And he'd been in his front yard, and he saw the car like kind of pulling over and the guy getting out. Now he didn't know that anybody had been shot in the car. He thought it was just like an accident or something was the matter with the car or something like that. So he says to his wife, he's like, I'm going to go see if they need any help. Why don't you call the police and report the accident? So he gets in his car and drives over to where the guy is, on the bicycle. And he like pulls up and he's like, hey man, are you all right? What happened with the accident or whatever? And then the guy on the bicycle pulls out a gun and shoots that guy in the back of the head.
This is like something out of a movie. I mean, really.
This is like amazing. This is amazing to me. So after that happens, so Robert Matsky, who is driving a car, has been shot. So obviously his car kind of goes careening off toward, this other car in a parking lot. Meanwhile, this woman who was coming out of the grocery store, she sees that and thinks that's another car accident. So she calls the police and reports that as a car accident. So now the cops think that there's 2 car accidents, even though all these people have been shot. So the cops come, and since they at first think it's a car accident, they didn't really, they weren't super careful to like, they didn't know it was a murder scene. So it's like, bystanders are coming around, like trying to get people out of the car thinking they've been hurt in the car accident. There was like a sprinkler on, it like wiped off all this evidence and all this other stuff. And it's just like, it was this huge thing. And then finally they figure out that these people have been shot and who was that guy on the bicycle. Now it turned out that somebody in the grocery store, like a woman, had seen the guy on the bike, and he had put the bike in the back of like a tan Ford that had a black top, and it was driven by another guy that was like his getaway driver, presumably. And he got into that car and they took off. So that was pretty much the only thing. Now, there was also another guy who was, he owned like a TV repair shop on Anna Maria Island, and he was also a photographer, like an amateur, and he had a camera with him all the time. Now, when he saw the car, Dr. Dumois' car, kind of going off the road, he instinctively just like took a picture of it. So he actually did get a picture of the killer. However, he forgot to turn the autofocus on his camera. So even though he did get a picture of the murder scene, he did get a picture of the killer, it was too blurry to be of any use. Now, as it turned out, Raymond Barrows, who was Dr. Dumois's brother-in-law, he actually survived. But Dr. Dumois, the two little boys, and Robert Matsky, the guy that had followed after the guy on the bike, they all died. So they never found anything to do. Like, they have a description of the guy, who they said he was about 6 feet tall, kind of thin, but really muscular. They said he had kind of thick brown hair, like combed straight back, like off his forehead, that he had a cleft chin. They also said he had blue eyes and that he might have spoken with like kind of a New England accent, maybe like a Boston accent or something like that. And that's about the only description that they have. So, despite years and years of like looking into this case, they were, they kind of the police explored like a lot of kind of different avenues. They thought, well, maybe it had something to do with maybe Raymond Barrows was, the target of the attack. Like maybe he had something to like drug trafficking or something. Maybe it had something to do with, because Dr. Dumois was originally from Cuba and he had escaped like when Castro was in. Maybe it had something to do with that. They even went so far as to think, maybe because Dr. Dumois was a pediatrician, they said, well, maybe, one of the parents of like one of his patients like was mad that he didn't do enough to like help them or something like that, and maybe he killed them because of that, or maybe it was just completely random. They're really not entirely sure. So other than that, they really had nothing. They did arrest one guy in Tampa. He was actually originally from Chicago. His name was Richard Lee Whitley. And he was wanted by the FBI. There was like a murder that had taken place in Falls Church, Virginia, like shortly before that. But he was subsequently released. They also arrested another guy named William Peter Kuhlman. And he had actually killed a woman in Bradenton, or allegedly killed a woman in Bradenton with the same caliber of handgun. But he was acquitted. And they did like question him in the Kingfish boat ramp murders, but they couldn't find any evidence of his involvement in that either. So as far as I know, like they've reopened the case fairly recently. I think I read they reopened it in 2010, and they might have even reopened it again, like even more recently than that. But yeah, this is, like I said, this is one of the ones that like really got me, not only because it was, Florida. I used to live in Tampa. And Florida, and I'd never even heard of it, even though, I was a kid when it happened. But just every single, motive for this just sounds like, who does that? And he's on a bike. He comes out of a bush on a bike, shoots a bunch of people in the middle of the afternoon, and then just wanders off like nothing happened.
It sounds like a hitman. It really does.
It's like, that really sounds like the most likely thing. And it's like, the fact that Raymond Barrows, if he was the one that was targeted, because he was the first one shot.
Yeah.
So it does seem a little more likely, if this wasn't a random crime, that maybe he was the target and then the other three guys were there. So he said, well, whatever, I'm just going to like shoot all of them. Even though he survived, but he didn't say anything. But, if he was involved in some criminal activity, maybe he didn't want to, tempt fate.
A lot of these ones with firearms, to me, sounds like you've got really sick people who like get a hold of their first gun.
Yeah, and are like, oh, I wonder what it would feel like to shoot somebody.
And they might have these terrible homicidal thoughts, but they might be physically weak or not be able to go through with like bashing someone's head in or stabbing somebody. But they get a hold of their first pistol and they're just like, hey.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. It could be as simple as that.
let's move on to this one. Is an interesting case, and I'll tell you, there's actually someone that we know that's actually kind of linked to this one that we found out. Amy,
don't snitch at him.
Amy Mihaljevic.
Oh, Amy Mihaljevic. Yeah, this is a pretty weird one. Let me scroll down my notes because I have them all. I have all the notes like laid out in the order that you gave them to me. So.
Yeah. So I'm skipping around because there's no way we're going to get to all of these.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was thinking. It's like, because some of these are like super, super complicated. But yeah, so Amy Mihaljevic, this one happened in Bay Village, Ohio in October of 1989. Now, this one started, Amy Mihaljevic, she was 10 years old. She's at home one day, like you do. The phone rings. She picks it up. Now, on the other end of the phone, presumably, is this man that says, you have to come meet me at the Bay Ridge Shopping Center, and I want you to help me pick out a present for your mom because she just got a promotion at the magazine that she worked at. So they're not sure if she knew this guy, like if he was like a family friend or if he was a coworker of her mom's or something, because her mom had just got a promotion. So it didn't sound weird to her, I guess. So she says to the guy, she's like, oh, okay, well, I'll meet you down there and we'll buy my mom a present. So witnesses.
Now how do they know that?
That I'm not entirely sure about.
Did someone overhear the conversation?
I think that's what it was.
Like her brother or something?
Yeah, possibly. Because everybody, I think someone else was in the house and heard her talking.
Okay.
Because, a few sources I read said, it sounded like she knew the guy. You know what I mean? Or that she wasn't, who are you or anything. She was just like, oh, hey, it's you. Yeah, let's do that. You know what I mean?
That sounded a little bit Tom, like Tom there. It's like, well, how did they know this?
Yeah, that's the thing, but I don't know. But yeah, so evidently she's seen on October 27th, she's talking to a guy in front of a barbershop at Bay Village Square. Presumably this is the same man that she was talking to on the phone. A couple of her school, friends were kind of passing by and they saw her. They said nothing looked weird. She didn't look threatened. She looked totally fine. So, but shortly after that happened, after her friends saw her, she disappeared. Now, she was missing for more than 3 months. They actually didn't find her body until February of 1990. She was found face down in a field in Ruggles Township, not far off County Road 1181. She had been raped and stabbed multiple times. Also, the killer took a bunch of her clothes and her jewelry that she had been seen wearing the last time she was seen. Took her shoes and other things they think maybe as souvenirs. So the only kind of physical evidence they had, they said that they found on her body, they found these kind of fibers. They were tan. And they think that they were from the inside of a General Motors vehicle manufactured between 1976 and 1978. So there was that. They knew what car the guy had, or roughly. Now, interestingly, and maybe this might answer your question, but when they reopened the case the first time in 2006, police said that they had gotten reports that other girls in that area had gotten similar phone calls.
Yeah.
To Amy.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how long the police had known about that, but they didn't report it until 2006.
So, one of our fellow podcasts out there, Cruising with Steak, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but one of the co-hosts, James Cruz, he's said it on the show before, so it's not like a secret. His wife, he's from Cleveland, Ohio, that area.
Yeah.
His wife actually got one of those calls. She was one of the girls.
No way.
Yeah. And that's how I knew about the about Amy Mihaljevic before I even read any of the book, because he mentioned that on our show one time, said that just it came up in the conversation.
Can you imagine? That always freaked me out because that freaks me out. I mean, obviously it freaks me out like getting murdered by a serial killer, but it also freaks me out too. Like what if you'd been one of the women that got picked up hitchhiking by Ed Kemper?
Yeah.
And he let you go because he let a lot of people go.
150 people, according to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
According to him. So what if, and it's like, I'm always like, after that guy was caught, like if you saw that on the news and you're like, holy crap, I totally got to ride with that guy.
Yeah,
that would be super creepy.
Big lanky dude.
Yeah. Holy crap. But yeah, so so all these phone calls, they were speculating that maybe he got all their names and addresses and phone numbers and stuff from, there was like a visitor's book at the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center, like in the area, because they said that pretty much all the girls that got those phone calls had been there like shortly beforehand and had written in the visitor's book. And I guess they wrote their addresses or phone numbers or whatever in there. So they thought that maybe there was a link there. So like I said, that was 2006. They announced that they kind of reopened again in 2016. And they came forward with like some more evidence that they had in the case. They said they had a curtain that was like olive green that had been made out of a bedspread that they thought had been used to wrap Amy's body with. And it had dog hair on it that was was similar to the hair from Amy's dog. They also found 3 hairs, like human hairs, on her clothing. And they announced in 2019 that they are trying to get a partial DNA profile of the killer from that. So that was pretty recent. So we'll see how that goes if they ever solve this.
Let's cover a few more cases. This is kind of towards the bottom of your list. Inokashira Park dismemberment incident.
Oh, the Inokashira Park. Yeah. This one's crazy too. Again, just like so random.
Yeah.
It sounds like a death metal album.
Slightly.
With a band probably from Florida.
Yeah. I'd actually be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if there was like a death metal album called this. But yeah, this happened in spring of 1994. And there was a park called Inokashira Park. It was in Tokyo. And so there's this cleaning woman. It's April 23rd. And she's like cleaning out the garbage cans. And she notices this bag in there that like smelled really, really bad. Why she wanted to look in there, I don't know. But she did. So... You know what I mean? It's like, oh, super stinky. Let's see what that is. But yeah,
what's that? That's weird.
Yeah, so she opens the bag and there's like a human foot in there. So obviously she calls the police. So the police come and clean out this bag. There were several bags in the garbage can. They found 24 pieces of a human body.
Nice.
This was a shoulder, 2 feet, 2 hands. And a bunch of other chunks. They had all been cut into like 8-inch pieces, also drained of blood and washed. They never did find the torso. They never did find the head. They never found the genitalia. Now, a few days later, they identified the murder victim as a 35-year-old architect named Seiichi Kawamura. Now, he had last been seen... Now, he lived like not too far from the park. He had last been seen like the night before, like leaving a karaoke bar about 11 o'clock. He was by himself, allegedly. And he had been reported missing the next day because he hadn't come back from, being out of the karaoke bar. So they thought that this body had been cut apart with like a fisherman's knife and maybe an electric saw. They think that they started cutting him up while he was still alive. Yeah. They weren't sure entirely how he died. Like, they don't know what the exact cause of death was. Like, they don't know if it was just because they started cutting on them or if they
It's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, they're like, it's kind of hard to tell because, like I said, they didn't find the head or they just found pieces and they were all like cut up and stuff. Now, they did have some witnesses that remembered seeing the guy, like seeing the victim, like going into the park. Other witnesses also reported seeing 2 guys around 4 a.m. like carrying a bag around the park, which presumably that was the killer. Now, one witness who lived near the park said that they heard a car hitting something like in the middle of the night. And so for a while, people were thinking, oh, well, maybe somebody like just hit the guy accidentally and then cut him up like and put him in the garbage can to cover up the crime. I'm like, that seems a little far fetched. And also because the guy was like so, neatly portioned out, like just to be gross about it, and had been like drained of blood. And I don't believe they found any other blood. So I don't think he was actually killed in the park. I think he was killed somewhere else. They cut him up somewhere else and then dumped him there in the park. Now, as far as they looked into the victim's like background or anything like that, he didn't appear to have any enemies. He didn't really seem to be up to anything shady that would like, that would bring this down upon him. Not that anyone deserves it, but, they're thinking maybe it was Yakuza, maybe it was an organ dealing gang, maybe he was in a cult and he was trying to leave and that was like his punishment or something like that. But other than that, nothing. And it's sad because it's like every single case I have to end it with that. Other than that, nothing.
What kind of electrical saw? Are we talking about like a circle saw or like a reciprocal?
Sefriel really wants to know.
I was thinking electric saw. I was thinking like a jigsaw or something like that. Or maybe one of those saws like they cut like wood planks with. That circular saw. I was thinking about that.
Yeah. I've taken a circular saw to the knee before. That's what I was wondering. That would be the way to solve it. Yeah, it's pretty.
Oh my
it's
God.
Pretty gruesome. But that would be the way to solve it, because I'm sure the next week that guy was going around to construction sites and, hey, I got some stuff for sale. I don't mind that. There's some red paint on it.
Yeah, right. He's trying to unload it on Craigslist or whatever. Slightly used.
So the next one I want to talk about, and this is Tristan Brubach, and I want to warn everybody, this one is like the most brutal. For some reason, this one struck me as the most brutal from all three of the books.
But yeah, this Tristan Brubach, and this is another one I'm surprised isn't better known. I mean, I guess I understand why it's not better known in the United States because it happened in Germany, but the sheer brutality of it and the fact that they never solved it is like really freaky. Yeah. So this happened in 1998. It was end of March, and it was the last day of school before they got out for Easter break. So little Tristan Brubach, he was 13 years old. He lived with his dad and his grandma. His mom had died a short time before. And his dad had already gone to work. He went to work really early at like 4 a.m. Now, Tristan gets up at 8 o'clock. And he calls his dad at work and he says, my back is really hurting today and I don't really feel like going to school. So his dad thinks he's just, slacking off. And he's like, no, just go ahead to school. And he's like, if you still feel bad, like at lunch or later on, like you can leave and you can go to the doctor or whatever. So Tristan's like, okay, fine. So he starts going to school. He meets up with his little buddy on the way to school. He was just walking. He ran into his friend Boris. They kind of hung out and smoked some cigarettes and stuff. So they actually didn't turn up at school until late. It was like second period. They get there about 9 o'clock in the morning. Now, according to all his teachers and classmates, Tristan was in school all his classes prior to lunchtime, and he went to lunch. Now, his first class after lunch, about 15 minutes into that, he went up to his teacher and said, just my back is really hurting, and, I want to go home and I want to go see a doctor or whatever. Now, the teacher asked him like what had happened to his back, and he said that he had fallen out of a tree the day before and had hurt his back. Although other witnesses said that he had actually been not necessarily in a fight, but he was kind of bullied. And there had been like some other boys like throwing rocks at him. And they think maybe that might be where if the back injury was real and he wasn't just faking it, then that might have been where that came from. But he didn't like to tell people that he got bullied because apparently he was really sensitive about it. So he just told people he fell out of a tree. So the teacher said, okay, well, you can go. So Tristan leaves school. It's about 1:30 in the afternoon. He takes a bus and he gets off the bus at the Frankfurt Hecht train station. Now, he spent about 2 hours at this train station, and there was some CCTV footage of him. 1:46, he's seen on the CCTV camera. He was inside a shop. It looked like he was moving toward the payphone, but they weren't entirely sure. They said there was also another guy in there, like kind of near him, but the image was too blurry to determine like whether he was actually interacting with the guy or if the guy just happened to be standing there or whatever. So they weren't sure like who that was or if there was a relationship. Now, later on in the day, like other classmates also saw him kind of hanging around at the train station. This was between 2:15 and 2:45. One of the girls said that he looked like he was sitting on a bench waiting for somebody, but wasn't entirely sure. He might have just been sitting there for some other reason. The last time that he was seen alive, there was a woman who was walking her dog through the park, like right near the train station. This was, a little before 3:30 p.m. So this woman's walking her dog, and Tristan was apparently like a big animal lover. Like he had a pet rabbit at home and he loved animals. And so Tristan was sitting on a bench when this woman walked by. He was sitting there smoking, and he asked if he could pet her dog. So she stopped and let him pet the dog, and he's like, "Oh, I love animals," and everything like that. She said he seemed really friendly and really nice and everything. Now, after that little interaction, she kept on walking. Now, she said when she turned around and looked, like a couple minutes later, she said now there were two adult males like sitting on either side of Tristan on the bench. She said they looked quote unquote foreign. I'm not sure entirely what that means, but that's what she said. She said these two guys that were sitting there looked foreign, i.e. not German. Now, they're not sure what happened to him exactly after that, like the 90 minutes after that, but it was 90 minutes later. There was another group of little kids, and they were going through Brubach tunnel, which is this little shortcut, and it goes underneath the train overpass. It's like this, it's this really it's closed up now, but because of this. But there's like a little sidewalk through there, and then there's like a little river. I hesitate to call it a river. I guess it kind of is, but it's more like a stream. And a lot of kids like took a shortcut because there was like a school and there was like a daycare over there. So these kids like start going through this tunnel, and they see Tristan Brubach in there dead. So they run back out and they go and tell the teacher at the daycare that, there's a dead kid in the tunnel. So the teachers come to make sure they're not making stuff up, and then they call the cops. Now, the kid at first, he just looked like he was sleeping, but then they get closer to him, and what had happened, he had been beaten and choked, probably like at the mouth of the tunnel, and then the killer had dragged him into the tunnel, slashed his throat, almost decapitating him. The wound went all the way to his spine. Good then Lord. He took all the kid's blood out, like he bled the kid out into the water, like, the water that went alongside the path. He also took out the boy's testicles from his scrotum and took them with him, presumably. He also took a bunch of chunks of flesh out of his thigh and buttocks, and also took those along with him.
Those like Albert Fish is what that reminded me of. Yeah, this is some
Albert Fish stuff right here. Now, they presumed that because the boy's backpack was not found at the scene, they thought maybe the killer had put the pieces of the boy's body in the backpack and had taken them away with them, either because he wanted to keep them for some reason or because he was going to eat them. So, yeah. Now, the only thing they found on the remains, they said one creepy thing was that apparently there'd been like a struggle, because I guess, I don't know if Tristan was like cutting through the tunnel, because a lot of people did. And then the guy just like grabbed him at the mouth of the tunnel and dragged him farther back in there so they wouldn't be seen. But they said apparently one of his shoes had come off in the struggle. And then the killer, like after he had killed the boy, he went to all the trouble of like going back to the mouth of the tunnel, picking up the shoe, and then he put it like on the boy's chest, like, like ta-da kind of thing. Yeah. Which I thought was kind of creepy.
That was very strange. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, why would he bother to do that? I don't know.
So they did find. It's almost like he had respect, like some weird respect for his victim or something. It felt. I'm not one to go really too sensationalist on things, but it felt like really like a religious thing almost.
It may have been. I mean, it's so weird. And the weird thing about it, it's like, not only was this like a really horrible, like brutal crime against a very young kid, but this happened, it was the middle of the afternoon, and this was like a busy train station. And that tunnel was like, people were walking through that tunnel all the time. Yeah, it was dark and creepy and everything, but it was like a common shortcut. So it's like this guy, I mean, he just picked, like, you know, if you're going to murder somebody, that really seems like the worst possible. And to do all of that in there, but they think that he did that in like less than 15 minutes.
Right. And
because there have been people all around there.
And some kids think that some kids saw him in there.
Yeah, because they said what later on, like after the death was reported, there was a group of kids that had been planning to go through the tunnel, but they said then we looked in the tunnel and we saw this guy. And they said he was like crouching over an object. They didn't know what it was. And they thought that it looked weird and creepy. So they said, you know, we're just going to go around. And because of the time that happened, they're pretty sure that those kids saw the man killing Tristan Brubach, but that they didn't know, like they didn't realize it was a kid. They just saw the man like lean the victim. So, but they did actually remember what the guy looked like. And this tells me too, because the guy was really like distinctive looking. And I'm amazed that they didn't find him, because they interviewed all the kids separately. They all said he was about average height, about 5'7". They said he was pretty like thin. He had light colored eyes, probably like blue or light green. They said he had long blonde hair that was pulled back in a braid or a ponytail, and he had a baseball cap on. They all said that he looked kind of scruffy, kind of dirty, and that he had this really big, and they could see this like even in the darkness of the tunnel and everything. They said he looked like he had a hair lip, or he had like a big, huge scar like on his upper lip. And it was like drastic enough that they could see it from far away. So the fact that they never found this guy, because other people saw him that day too, like, you know, people saw him like a guy that looked like that, like coming out of the tunnel and stuff, but they never could find him, even though it seems like it would be super easy. Now, a couple days after the body was found, this guy called the Frankfurt police station and said that he was the guy that had killed Tristan and that he wanted to turn himself in. So he told the cops, I'm at that train station right now. I'm on a payphone. But he described himself as being like taller than the guy that had seen. He said he was 5'11", and he said he had black hair. Now, I actually listened to, if you Google it, you can listen to the audio of the phone call. They actually do have a recording of it. It's in German, obviously, so I couldn't really tell what he was saying. But a lot of people that were commenting on it that did speak German said that guy sounds drunk. I couldn't really tell because, like I said, it was German.
Right.
But yeah, so this guy called and he says at the end, he says, arrest me.
Huh.
So the cops like run to the train station, obviously, but they couldn't find anyone of that description. They couldn't find anyone of the other description. So they think it was probably just somebody playing a prank.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
Stuff that is.
Kind of like the Zodiac Killer stuff where the guy calls into the radio station or the TV show. And yeah.
But yeah, so they did find like a single bloody fingerprint like on the body, and they've been trying to match that. So like they've fingerprinted like thousands and thousands of guys like in that immediate area, and they so far still have not found a match. They were able to get like a DNA profile, but they haven't found a match of that either. They did find Tristan's backpack later on. About a year later, actually. It was about 16 miles away. Now, inside the backpack, they didn't find any body parts or anything like that, but they did find a map of Germany that was in Czech, which apparently Tristan did not speak. So they're presuming that the killer was maybe Czech, because obviously Tristan didn't speak that language. Now, there was like some stuff later, like after this came out, like with the backpack and the map and everything like that, like this woman was like, oh, you know, I was in the woods one day and I saw this crazy guy who was kind of out ranting in the woods, like near where the backpack was found, that he was saying something like he had to find his lost sheep and that he said he was in the French Foreign Legion and all this other kind of stuff. But it turned out that they identified that guy, and I guess that there was no way that he could have been the killer because he was actually in the French Foreign Legion and he was accounted for that day, like in his unit or whatever. Yeah. So he was just some crazy person ranting. But like I said, they did find the backpack with the map in it, and that's pretty much where that stands. Now, another creepy thing that happened too was that later on in October of 1999, which is more than a year after the murder.
This was 1998. Did this happen?
Yeah, that it happened in March 1998. So in October of 1999, Tristan's grandmother goes to visit Tristan's grave, and it looked like somebody had tried to dig the kid up. Like they didn't
weird.
They didn't get to the coffin. Like they just went there, and there was like a big pile of dirt, like on a tarp, like next. But it looked like somebody had started to dig him out, but they didn't. They either gave up or they got caught or something like that. But so they're not sure. Was this the killer, and he just like came back because he wanted the body, or was it just because this was a pretty high profile case? Because stuff like that did not happen in Germany. I mean, you know, this case was like super, super rare. So it could be that there was just some sicko that was like, oh, that case is so famous, I'm going to go dig up the body for some reason. And then something happened. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this, it's really strange. And there's so many elements there. There's so much weird stuff with that. And like, whenever you get to like this whole thing about people kidnapping children and killing them, you get to the weird, bizarre occult stuff. Like it gets really, really weird.
Yeah.
And, you know, like you don't want to step into like the satanic panic stuff, but like, you know, you'd almost make stuff like that kind of case there almost maybe makes you think, like, because there seems like a very much like a really ritual and religious aspect to that case to me.
There really does. I mean, you know, it's like satanic panic, and I'm sure that there's like, you know, obviously most cases don't have anything to do with cults or anything like that, but it's, you know, on the other hand, it's a big world. There's a lot of crazy people out there. So, you know, every now and then I'm sure there is one that has a cult, you know, some kind of occult significance to it. And this does actually kind of seem like one of those, because that just seems like such a random, you know, and it's like stuff came out later about people were trying to kind of paint Tristan as like, oh, he was like a street kid, or, you know, right, he was a drug mule, or he was a prostitute, and, you know, and that guy was one of his clients or something like that. But I mean, I think that's been exaggerated. I mean, yeah, his mom was dead, but, you know, his family, and he did run around a lot without supervision, but, you know, a lot of kids do that age, and it just seems like it wasn't, that there wasn't really a lot of evidence to support that. So whether he knew this guy and this guy ended up killing him, whether this guy was like stalking other kids and just decided to kill him that day, I don't really know. But to this day, they still haven't caught him. For a while, they thought it might have been Manfred Seal, that German serial killer, who actually... He was a serial killer that they didn't know was a serial killer until after he was dead.
Yeah, that story's really weird.
Yeah.
You want to tell that? Yeah.
Yeah. So, he actually ended up, they don't think that he killed Tristan, but for a while he was kind of like a prime suspect. What ended up happening with him is that he died in 2014, and everybody around him, he had a wife and a daughter, like he worked in a printing company or something. He's just totally normal dude. He died of cancer in 2014. Then his daughter was cleaning out his, he had like a rented storage unit. She's cleaning it out. She finds this big blue barrel in there that has human body parts in it. Now, it turned out
Could you imagine being her?
That's what I mean. It's like, this is like her dad, and she was like grown. It's like, so she'd known this guy her whole life, and then she's going and cleaning out his stuff, and it's like, you know, the worst you would expect to find is like some yucky porn or something like that, and then you end up with like a barrel with like human body parts in it.
He's a human butcher.
Yeah, it's like, can you imagine? So the body parts ended up belonging to a prostitute who was named Simone Diallo, and she had been missing since 2003. So they think, like, police start looking into this guy's past, and they figure, like, since 1971, when they think he might have murdered like 2 women that he worked with, but he's been going to prostitutes like fairly regularly. He's not killing all of them, clearly, but he's beating some of them up. Like, a lot of them reported like him being really violent toward them. But some of them they think that he killed. They think that he might have killed between 5 and 9 women between 1971 and 2004. And nobody even knew what he was up to. He was dead before they found out. Now, the reason that they first thought that he might have killed Tristan Brubach was because he would do very similar kind of sexual mutilations. Like he would cut off women's breasts and, things of that nature. So they were thinking because of the bodily mutilations were very similar that maybe he had something to do with it. But as far as they know, he didn't target young boys. He just targeted prostitutes, older, women in their late teens, early 20s.
Right.
So it wasn't
his type.
His victim profile.
Yeah.
Yeah, because usually those are two different types of pathologies. It's not, it's not impossible, but they're pretty sure that it wasn't him. But they don't really have any idea who did do it. However,
let's finish up with one from the music industry, and that's Peter Ivers. This is one that. I discovered a few years ago, the whole new wave theater stuff. And a lot of that you can see on YouTube now, all that kind of old new wave stuff from LA, from the 80s. Yeah. But Peter Ivers was the host of that show, and he died kind of in a mysterious circumstance.
He did, yeah. And this was another one that it just seems like it's sad because he seemed like a really influential guy in the early 80s, but it seems like he's kind of forgotten about, even though he got murdered horribly. But yeah, so this happened this guy, Peter Ivers, he actually moved to LA in the early 70s. He was a musician and he had released some albums and opened for the New York Dolls, Fleetwood Mac, stuff like that. He played harmonica. And after he moved there, he kind of got in with a lot of really influential people. He was he knew all the big comedians at the time, Jim Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, all those people. He hung out, with the Saturday Night Live people and stuff. He also was responsible for, people who have seen Eraserhead. He wrote and sang the Lady in the Radiator song.
Yeah, I had no idea about that till you read that
I
in
didn't
your
know
book.
that either.
Yeah.
And he was also actually responsible for getting the screening where they showed Eraserhead to Francis Ford Coppola and Mel Brooks, which resulted in them letting David Lynch direct The Elephant Man, which of course was kind of like his big break. So, you know, Peter Ivers was like indirectly responsible for David Lynch getting his big break and everything. So this guy, he later went on and hosted this show called New Wave Theater, as you said, started out on a local station in Los Angeles and then went national when USA Network used to have Night Flight, which I remember.
Yeah. I barely remember it, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember watching that all the time. But yeah, so it was like they had like live clips of shows. It was usually like LA, like punk and post-punk bands. They had like 45 Grave, Fear, Dead Kennedys, Circle Jerks.
Yeah, some great stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that. So he was all up in that scene. You know, and like I said, he was also in with like a bunch of comedians and stuff. Now, however, on March 3rd of 1983, he was actually found dead in his apartment. He had been bludgeoned to death with a hammer. Now, weirdly, I'm not really sure why the police allowed this. I mean, I have suspicions. Well, because there's been other cases, particularly in Los Angeles, and you know, of people that are kind of famous. It seems like the cops are really cavalier about letting people in to like run all over the crime scene, which they did in this case. Like they let people come in, like neighbors, friends, they just like let them run all over the apartment. They let David Jove, who was the guy that had started New Wave Theater, he was like a Canadian guy. They let him take Peter Ivers' bloody bed sheets, like from the bed. Why he wanted them, I don't know. Like some people think that David Jove might have killed him, but you know, there's not enough evidence to convict him on that. But the fact that the cops just kind of let everybody run roughshod over the thing. So, you know, that it's one of those things where it's probably like, you know, it'll never be solved at this point. But as I said, David Jove, who was kind of like Peter Ivers' partner on New Wave Theater, a lot of people thought that maybe he might have been the killer because he was kind of, they said even on the show, he was kind of like came forth like very bullying and stuff. Like even one friend of theirs like said that he was like Charles Manson kind of. You know, he was always real provocative, like trying to get a rise out of people. And when they interviewed they interviewed like a lot of famous people, like his suspects and persons of interest and stuff. They interviewed Harold Ramis, and as a suspect, but he was cleared. Obviously he didn't do it, but
Really?
but he said that he's like, of everybody I know and that knows Peter Ivers, David Jove is the only person that I would not rule out. So, but David Jove actually died in 2004, also of cancer, pancreatic cancer. And so they were never able to, charge him with that. Now, some people have speculated that maybe, because a lot of other people that knew David Jove was like, oh, he'd never do that. Now, some people have said that, the neighborhood where Peter Ivers lived was kind of sketchy. And, there was drug addicts, there was homelessness, there was stuff like that. So it's like, it could be that somebody just busted into his apartment and killed him for shits and giggles, or, came in to rob him or something like that. It didn't necessarily have to be someone he knew, but like I said, again, no progress been made on the case. It's like, I believe they reopened it in 2008 after a biography of him came out. But as far as I know, there have been no further developments on that score.
Yeah, and you also talk about Joe Cole in the book too, the guy who was I guess
and
he
this was one where again, he was shot in the course of a robbery, clearly. Yeah. But I thought that the case was so well known because of his, relationship with Henry Rollins that it would have been weird to leave it out. I mean, it's just so sad because it was just so random. I mean, this happened in, late 1991. It was late December. It's like, he lived with Henry Rollins. They were roommates. They had gone out one night they had gone to see Hole, actually, at the Whiskey A Go-Go.
Yeah.
We're coming home from the concert, and they stopped by a grocery store to get some snacks or whatever. And they're outside of their house, and two guys just came up to them and said, "Hey, give us some money." And they put both of them on the ground. Then they start going through their pockets, and they were mad because they only had less than $50 between them. So they told Henry, they're like, "Well, I'm going to shoot you guys. Why don't you go in the house and get us some more money?" So Henry starts to go in the house to get more money, and then they just shot Joe Cole in the face. Yeah. They also shot at Henry, but they missed him.
Don't rob punk rockers, because you're not going to get any money off of punk rockers. That's not going to happen.
That's what I mean. It's like, don't you guys know anything?
Yeah, and that's never been solved to this day. I mean,
it's like, what, you want a candy wrapper? That's about all I got.
and Sonic Youth, I think, did songs about him. I think in the JC Dirty album.
Yeah. Yeah. And and Henry Rollins published a book of Joe Cole's writing. I remember, because I used to watch 120 Minutes a lot back in the day. Yeah. And I remember when this happened, and I remember Henry Rollins being on there a lot, talking about it. And obviously he made it a big part of his spoken word stuff after that too. So I saw that as well. So this was one case that, like I said, even though technically it happened in the course of a robbery, which normally I wouldn't include, but because he was so well known and because it was something that I remembered, because I remember being really shocked when it happened, that I just, that I thought I'd put it in there.
Well, we've barely scratched the surface as usual. There's so much more we could have talked about. I give you a big list. I think we ended up talking about 5. So many murders. But
it's so depressing.
Let's we're gonna do a Patreon segment with you and with Tom, but let's save the Alcazar murders for the Patreon segment.
Okay.
Let's do that, and so that'll give maybe people an incentive to become a Patreon at Conspirinormal.com or Patreon.com/Conspirinormal. Yeah, that's it. So only $1, guys, get you in. You can hear this show. So Jenny, where is the book available? Where can people find it, and where can people find you? And I also wanted to ask you a question. Since it's 2019 and the first 20 years of the 21st century are pretty much behind us, are you going to do another book?
I have been thinking about it. That is one of, I have 3 or 4 possible next projects for next year. And that is definitely one of them. Because I was thinking that myself. I'm like, well, gosh, now it's like 20 years into the new century already. So it's like, maybe I should start early and just do like a volume 1. So that is a very distinct possibility. Yeah.
Cool. It's time.
Right. And where can people find the book and find your excellent podcast?
Amazon is the easiest place to find the book. It's available in print format, ebook format, and I also do audiobook formats. I read them myself. So you can find them all on there. Also, the podcast you should find on YouTube. Just search 13 O'Clock Podcast. We have all our cute little episodes on there. We do all kind of paranormal, true crime. We review movies, new ones, old ones, all kind of different stuff. And I also have a website, www.jennyashford.com, that has a link to all the different stuff I do, which is a lot of stuff.
Excellent. Okay, Jenny, stay on the line for us. We're going to continue this conversation on our Patreon. And guys, we'll be back to close out this episode on Conspirinormal.
If you want your HR team to hire top talent for your company, tell them about ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter's powerful matching technology identifies people with the right skills, education, and experience, and actively invites them to apply to your company's job posts, so you get qualified candidates fast. It's no wonder that ZipRecruiter is rated #1 by employers in the U.S. This rating comes from hiring sites on Trustpilot with over 1,000 reviews. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/Conspirinormal. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Conspirinormal. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire.
Raise it up.
Raise the Kundalini.
Raise the Kundalini. That's right. So, it is 12:40 in the morning.
Burning the midnight oil.
Yeah. We did that show with Tom and Jenny. Well, actually with just Jenny on this one, but we did a show with Tom added in for the Patreon episode, and which we got to talk a little bit about bullshit kung fu guys.
That was pretty cool.
From the 70s, and some stuff about the Superstition Mountains and all that, and then we got into the Alcazar murder case, which
Colonia Dignidad too.
Yeah, so when we got on Colonia Dignidad, I don't even know how we did that, and that is available on our Patreon feed, or will be available on our Patreon feed pretty soon. So check it out, guys. We did, I think, like another hour with them.
Yeah, and then we did a Soraya show, which you guys have already heard now, right?
Yeah, I think by this time, the magic of time travel, you guys have already heard that show that we actually did second, but it got released first because we wanted to time it with Soraya's schedule. So, all right, well, we're going to close out this show, but we want to remind everybody, in case you haven't heard, Strange Realities Conference.
Strange Realities.
Yep, the Strange Realities Conference still going on, still happening on October 19th of 2019 at SIR Nashville. We are going to be there as our Tim Banal, Joshua Cutchin, Timothy Renner, Joe Damari, Mark Anthony Wyatt, and Zach Hunt speaking. And then we're going to have some extra surprise. Maybe a couple of surprise guests milling around as well.
Couple surprise legends.
Yeah.
And if you guys are planning on coming, we really need those pre-sales so we can gauge everything.
That's right.
These are very limited supply. We have hotels with a special rate. There's tons of cool stuff to do, and there'll be tons of cool fellow travelers to meet.
That's right. So, guys, please, go to strangerealitiesconference.com. It's only $30 to get in. We know that some people may be traveling, but if you are close to Nashville, please come for the weekend. Come hang out with us. We're going to be there. It's going to be really informative. For the first one we've done, so it's going to be really interesting. So, also, just little things and notes. Patreon, again, patreon.com/Conspirinormal. That's still there. It's still active. We're trying to put more stuff up on the Patreon feed as well. It's only $1 to get in, like we said before. And go to our YouTube channel. Please subscribe there at YouTube and Conspirinormal Podcast, and subscribe. And I think that's about it. I think we're going to close out the show.
All right.
So, guys, join us next time on Conspirinormal. StrangeRealitiesConference.com. The word is here now.
If you would like to help the show, please consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/Conspirinormal or leave a one-time donation at Conspirinormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast.